The dust rose in choking clouds as Catherine O'Sullivan stumbled off the stagecoach in Amarillo, Texas, her fine Boston traveling dress already coated in the red dirt of the Panhandle. And she knew immediately that her carefully constructed world was about to crumble into something she could never have imagined. It was June of 1883, and the town looked exactly like the nightmares she had conjured during the 3-week journey from Massachusetts. Wooden buildings lined the dusty main street, their paint peeling under the relentless sun. Cowboys on horseback ambled past, their spurs clinking with each step their horses took. Catherine clutched her carpetbag tighter, her knuckles white against the worn leather handle. Her father had died 2 months ago, leaving her with nothing but debts and a single letter from her uncle in Texas, offering her a place to stay on his ranch. Miss O'Sullivan, a weathered man with kind eyes, approached her, removing his hat. "I'm Frank Hutchins, foreman at the Double H Ranch." "Your uncle sent me to fetch you." Catherine nodded, trying to summon her voice. When she spoke, her Irish accent was thick, the result of growing up in Boston's immigrant neighborhoods despite her best efforts at elocution lessons. "Thank you kindly, sir. I appreciate your trouble in coming for me." Frank loaded her trunk onto the wagon, and they set off toward the ranch, 15 miles outside of town. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, nothing but prairie grass and the occasional mesquite tree breaking the monotony. Catherine had never seen so much open space. In Boston, buildings pressed against each other like worried neighbors. Here, the sky seemed to swallow everything. The Double H Ranch sprawled across 2,000 acres of prime grazing land. The main house was a sprawling 2-story structure with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. As Frank pulled the wagon to a stop, the front door opened and a young woman stepped out. She was perhaps 20 years old, Catherine's own age, with golden hair swept up in an elaborate style and a dress that probably cost more than Catherine's entire wardrobe. "So you're the charity case," the woman said, her voice dripping with honeyed contempt. "Father has been beside himself preparing for your arrival." Catherine descended from the wagon, her legs unsteady after the long ride. "I am Catherine O'Sullivan, and you must be my cousin." "Eleanor Hutchins," the woman said, her eyes traveling over Catherine's dusty appearance with obvious disdain. "Though I hardly think we can claim to be cousins. Your mother was father's half-sister, which barely counts as family at all." Before Catherine could respond, a booming voice called out from inside the house. "Eleanor, where are your manners? Let the girl come inside." Catherine's uncle emerged onto the porch. Samuel Hutchins was a bear of a man, tall and broad-shouldered despite his 60 years. His face cracked into a warm smile when he saw Catherine, and something in her chest loosened. At least one person seemed genuinely happy she had come. "Catherine, my dear girl," Samuel said, pulling her into an embrace that smelled of tobacco and leather. "You look just like your mother did at your age. Come in, come in. You must be exhausted." The house was furnished with surprising elegance, a testament to the ranch's prosperity. Eleanor led Catherine upstairs to a small bedroom at the back of the house. "This was the maid's room before she quit last month," Eleanor said with a pointed look. "I suppose it will do for you." Catherine bit back a sharp retort. She had nowhere else to go, and she knew it. "It is more than adequate, thank you." Over the next few days, Catherine tried to find her place in the household. Her uncle was kind but often away managing the ranch operations. Eleanor seemed to view Catherine's presence as a personal affront, and she never missed an opportunity to make her feelings known. The Irish accent that Catherine had once tried so hard to refine in Boston became Eleanor's favorite target. "Could you repeat that?" Eleanor would say at dinner, her hand cupped to her ear in exaggerated confusion. "Your accent is so thick I can barely understand a word." Catherine would flush and repeat herself, trying desperately to flatten her vowels and soften her consonants. But the harder she tried, the more her accent seemed to assert itself, as if it were determined to mark her as an outsider. The ranch hands were a different matter entirely. There were 15 men working the Double H, and most of them treated Catherine with polite indifference. All except one. James Mackenzie had been working at the Double H for 3 years, ever since he had drifted into Amarillo from Montana. He was 24 years old, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of a storm rolling across the plains. Catherine first saw him breaking horses in the corral, his movements fluid and confident as he worked with a skittish mare. "That's Mackenzie," one of the other ranch hands told her when he caught her watching. "Best horseman in the Panhandle. Your uncle pays him top dollar to keep him from moving on." Catherine had simply nodded and moved away, but she found her eyes seeking him out over the following days. There was something about the way he moved, the way he spoke quietly to the horses, that drew her attention. It was a week after her arrival when everything changed. Alina had convinced her father to host a small gathering for some of the neighboring ranchers and their families. Catherine helped with the preparations, trying to make herself useful. When the guests arrived, she stayed in the background, helping to serve refreshments and keep the platters filled. "Catherine, come here," Alina called out, her voice sugary sweet in a way that immediately put Catherine on guard. "I want you to meet the Reverend and Mrs. Morrison." Catherine approached the group, offering a polite smile. "It is a pleasure to meet you both." "Oh my, Mrs. Morrison said, her eyes widening. "What an unusual accent. Where are you from, dear?" Before Catherine could answer, Alina laughed. "She's from Boston, but her people are fresh off the boat from Ireland. You can barely understand her sometimes. Yesterday she asked me to pass the potatoes, and I thought she was asking about tomatoes. It was quite embarrassing." Heat flooded Catherine's face. Several people in the group chuckled, and she wanted nothing more than to disappear. She opened her mouth to excuse herself when a voice cut through the laughter. "I have always found Miss O'Sullivan's speech to be perfectly clear." Everyone turned. James Mackenzie stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands. He was not dressed for a social gathering, still wearing his work clothes, but he held himself with a quiet dignity that commanded attention. "Mackenzie," Samuel said, surprised. "I did not expect to see you here. Is something wrong with the herd?" "No, sir. Everything is fine. I came to give you my report on the North Pasture, but I can see you have company. I will come back tomorrow." "Nonsense," Samuel said. "Come in and have something to eat. You have been working since dawn." James stepped into the room and his eyes found Catherine's. She was still standing frozen in the midst of Alina's guests, her face burning with humiliation. "Miss O'Sullivan," James said, moving toward her with easy confidence. "I was hoping I might have a word with you about one of the horses. Your uncle mentioned you had experience with animals back in Boston." It was a lifeline, and Catherine grasped it gratefully. "Of course, Mr. Mackenzie." She followed him out onto the porch, gulping in the fresh air. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. James led her away from the house, toward the corrals where the horses dozed in the evening heat. "I apologize for the deception," James said once they were out of earshot. "I know you have no particular experience with horses. I just thought you might appreciate an escape." Catherine laughed, though it came out sounding more like a sob. "Thank you, that was very kind." "Your cousin should not speak to you that way," James said, his voice steady but firm. "There is nothing wrong with your accent. It is part of who you are." "It marks me as an outsider," Catherine said bitterly. "It tells everyone exactly where I come from and what I am." James was quiet for a moment, leaning against the corral fence. "I grew up in Montana," he said finally. "My mother was a Blackfoot woman. My father was a Scottish trapper. I did not fit in anywhere as a child, too white for the tribe, too Indian for the white settlements. I used to wish I could change myself, make myself into something people would accept without question." Catherine looked at him with new understanding. "What changed?" "I realized that the people who mattered did not care about those things," James said, "and the people who did care were not worth my time." He turned to face her fully, and in the dying light, his eyes were intense. "Your voice is music to my ears only, Miss O'Sullivan. I would not change a single note of it. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her that way before. In Boston, the boys from the neighborhood had teased her for putting on airs with her elocution lessons. The boys from the better families had looked down on her for her background, but James Mackenzie looked at her as if she were exactly right just as she was. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything," James replied. "I just wanted you to know that you do not have to change yourself for people like Alina Hutchins. You are worth more than that." He tipped his hat to her and walked away toward the bunkhouse, leaving Catherine standing by the corral with her heart hammering in her chest. She pressed her hands to her cheeks, feeling the heat there, and tried to understand what had just happened. Over the following weeks, Catherine found herself drawn into James's orbit. He would seek her out in the mornings when she came to feed the chickens, offering to show her the new foals or teach her to ride. Her uncle approved of the arrangement, pleased that Catherine was learning about ranch life. Alina, predictably, was furious. "You are making a spectacle of yourself," Alina hissed one morning as Catherine prepared to go out to the corrals. "Chasing after a half-breed ranch hand. It is pathetic." Catherine met her cousin's eyes steadily. "I am learning to ride horses. There is nothing scandalous about it." "Father may be blind to what is happening, but I am not," Alina said. "You have set your cap at Mackenzie, but you are wasting your time. He will never be anything more than hired help." "Perhaps that says more about your limited imagination than it does about James's potential," Catherine said quietly, and then walked out before Alina could respond. James was waiting by the corral with a gentle bay mare named Rosie. Over the past weeks, he had been teaching Catherine to ride, and she had proven to be a quick learner. She no longer needed help mounting, and she could manage the reins with increasing confidence. "Ready for a real ride today?" James asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. "How real are we talking?" Catherine asked, though she was already excited by the prospect. "I thought we might ride out to the creek. It is about an hour from here, but the path is easy and Rosie knows the way." They set out together, their horses walking side by side across the open prairie. It was early August now, and the heat was formidable, but a breeze offered some relief. James pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the ranch and the surrounding territory. Catherine found herself laughing more than she had in months, maybe years. The creek was a narrow ribbon of water cutting through the grassland, lined with cottonwood trees that offered blessed shade. James helped Catherine dismount, and they let the horses drink while they sat on the bank. "Tell me about Boston," James said. "What was your life like there?" Catherine picked at the grass, organizing her thoughts. "My father was a clerk in a shipping office. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable. My mother died when I was 12, and after that, it was just father and me. He wanted me to have opportunities, so he spent money we did not really have on my education. Dancing lessons, French lessons, elocution lessons." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He was so determined that I should rise above our circumstances. And then he died," James said gently. "And then he died," Catherine agreed. "I discovered he had been borrowing money to maintain our lifestyle. There were debts everywhere. I sold everything we owned, but it was not enough. My uncle's letter arrived like a miracle, even though I knew it meant leaving everything I had ever known." "Do you regret coming here?" Catherine looked at James, at his honest face and kind eyes, and shook her head. "No, I thought I would, but I do not. Boston feels like a dream now, like it happened to someone else." "You are happy here?" James asked, and there was something vulnerable in his expression, as if her answer mattered more than it should. "I am beginning to be," Catherine said softly. James held her gaze for a long moment, and Catherine felt the air between them thicken with unspoken words. Then he looked away, clearing his throat. "We should head back before your uncle sends out a search party." The ride back to the ranch seemed shorter, or perhaps Catherine was simply reluctant for it to end. As they approached the corral, she saw Alina standing on the porch, her arms crossed and her expression thunderous. That evening at dinner, Alina could barely contain her anger. "Father, I think we need to discuss the amount of time Catherine has been spending with the ranch hands. It is not appropriate. Samuel looked up from his plate, surprised. What are you talking about, Alina? She has been riding out alone with Mackenzie for weeks now. People are beginning to talk. People. Samuel's eyebrows rose. What people, Mrs.? Morrison mentioned it to me in town yesterday, Alina said triumphantly. She saw them riding together toward the creek. Samuel turned to Catherine, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. Is this true, Catherine? Have you been riding out to the creek with James? Catherine lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. Yes, Uncle, James has been teaching me to ride, and sometimes we go to the creek to let the horses rest. There has been nothing improper about it. Of course there has not, Samuel said, much to Alina's obvious dismay. James Mackenzie is a good man, and I trust him completely. If he says he is teaching you to ride, then that is what he is doing. He turned to Alina. And I will thank you not to spread gossip about your cousin. Catherine has had a difficult time of it, and she deserves our support, not our suspicion. Alina's face flushed red, but she knew better than to argue with her father when he used that tone. She ate the rest of her meal in furious silence while Catherine tried not to show her relief. After dinner, Catherine stepped out onto the porch to catch the evening breeze. She was surprised to find James there, sitting on the steps and staring out at the darkening prairie. Mr. Mackenzie, she said, I did not expect to see you here. I heard what Alina said at dinner, James said without turning around. The walls in the bunkhouse are thin and sound carries from the main house. Catherine sat down beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. My uncle defended both of us. There is nothing to worry about. But Alina is not wrong, James said, finally turning to look at her. People are talking, and they will continue to talk as long as we spend time together. Do you care what they say? Catherine asked, her heart beginning to pound. Not for my own sake, James said, but I care for yours. You have to live in this community. Your reputation matters. My reputation, Catherine repeated. My reputation as the poor Irish relation who lives on charity. That reputation, Catherine, James said, and the use of her first name sent a shiver through her. You know what I am trying to say. No, Catherine said, surprising herself with her boldness. I do not know. So why do you not tell me plainly? James was quiet for a long moment. I am a ranch hand with no land and no prospects. My mother's people would not claim me, and my father's people would not acknowledge me. I have nothing to offer a woman like you. A woman like me, Catherine said, her voice rising with emotion. What kind of woman am I exactly? I have no money, no family except an uncle who took me in out of obligation, and an accent that marks me as an outsider everywhere I go. We are not so different, you and I. It is different, James insisted. I am a man. I can drift from place to place and no one thinks less of me for it, but you need stability, you need security. What I need, Catherine said, her voice shaking, is to be seen. Really seen. And you are the only person who has looked at me since I arrived here and not seen a burden or a curiosity or a target for mockery. You see me, James. Do you have any idea how rare that is? James stared at her, his chest rising and falling with quick breaths. Catherine, I cannot offer you the life you deserve. How do you know what I deserve? Catherine asked. How do you know what kind of life I want? Before James could answer, the front door opened and Samuel stepped out. Catherine, there you are. I need to speak with you for a moment. Catherine rose reluctantly, her eyes still on James. Of course, Uncle. She followed Samuel into his study, a room she had only entered once before. The walls were lined with books, and a large desk dominated the center of the space. Samuel gestured for her to sit, then settled into his own chair with a sigh. Catherine, I want to talk to you about your future, he said. You have been here for 2 months now, and you have proven yourself to be a hard worker and a pleasant addition to our household. But I worry that you do not have a clear path forward. Catherine's stomach tightened. Are you asking me to leave? No, Samuel said quickly. Nothing like that. You are welcome here for as long as you wish to stay. But I have been thinking that you might benefit from more opportunities to meet people. There is a school teacher in town, a widow named Mrs. Fletcher, who has been looking for an assistant. I thought you might be interested in the position." A teacher's assistant, Catherine considered this. "I would need to live in town, I assume." "Mrs. Fletcher has a spare room she could rent to you. It would give you independence and a respectable position in the community." Samuel leaned forward. "I am not trying to push you away, Catherine. But I think you might be happier with a life of your own rather than living in a leaner's shadow." Catherine knew he was right, but the thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving James, made her chest ache. "May I think about it, of course. Take all the time you need." That night, Catherine lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling. She knew that accepting the teaching position would be the sensible thing to do. It would give her independence and respectability, two things she desperately needed. But it would also mean leaving James behind, and that prospect filled her with a grief she did not fully understand. The next morning, she found James in the stable, brushing down one of the horses. He looked up when she entered, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "I heard about the teaching position," he said. "Your uncle told the foreman this morning and word spread." "I have not decided yet," Catherine said. "You should take it," James said, his voice firm. "It is a good opportunity." "Is that what you want?" Catherine asked. "For me to go?" James set down the brush and crossed the stable to stand in front of her. "What I want does not matter." "It matters to me," Catherine whispered. James closed his eyes as if in pain. When he opened them again, they blazed with an intensity that made Catherine's knees weak. "I want you to stay. I want to wake up every morning knowing I will see you. I want to teach you to ride faster and farther. I want to hear your voice with that beautiful accent that a leaner mocks every single day for the rest of my life." He took a shaky breath. "But wanting something does not make it right. You deserve more than a life tied to a ranch hand." "Stop telling me what I deserve," Catherine said, stepping closer to him. "I am tired of people deciding my future for me. My father decided I should be educated above my station. A leaner has decided I should be ashamed of my background. My uncle has decided I should be a teacher. Everyone has an opinion about what Catherine O'Sullivan should do, but no one has bothered to ask Catherine O'Sullivan what she wants." "Then tell me," James said, his voice rough. "What do you want?" "I want you," Catherine said simply. "I want this. Whatever this is between us, I want to explore it and see where it leads. I want to stop being afraid of what people will think and start living for myself." James reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his calloused palms warm against her cheeks. "If we do this, there is no going back. People will talk, your uncle might withdraw his support, a leaner will make your life miserable." "Let them talk," Catherine said. "Let a leaner rage, I do not care anymore." James smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Your voice is music to my ears only," he said softly. "Every word you speak, every syllable, I mean it, Catherine, I love the way you sound." And then he kissed her, and Catherine felt her entire world shift on its axis. His lips were gentle at first, questioning, but when she pressed closer, the kiss deepened into something that made her forget where she was and why she should care. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Catherine laughed. "So what do we do now?" "Now," James said, "I go talk to your uncle. I tell him my intentions toward you are honorable. I tell him I want to court you properly. And if he says no, then I will work twice as hard and save every penny until I can afford to buy my own land. I will build you a house with my own 2 hands if I have to, but I will not let you go, Catherine, not now." Samuel, as it turned out, was less surprised than they had expected. "I have eyes, James," he said when James appeared in his study that afternoon. "I have watched the way you look at my niece, and I have watched the way she looks at you." "Then you know I want to court her, sir," James said. "With your permission." Samuel leaned back in his chair, studying the younger man. "Catherine has no dowry, no family connections to speak of. What she does have is a sharp mind and a kind heart. If you hurt her, I will make sure you regret it." "I would never hurt her," James said fiercely. "Then you have my permission," Samuel said. "But James, you should know that this will not be easy." There are people in this territory who will have opinions about you courting a white woman. There are others who will look down on Catherine for choosing a man with no land or money. You will both face challenges. We know, sir, but we want to try anyway. Samuel nodded slowly. Then I wish you both the best of luck. You are going to need it. Eleanor, predictably, was apoplectic when she learned of the courtship. This is insane, she railed at her father. You are allowing Catherine to throw herself away on a half-breed ranch hand. That is enough, Samuel said, his voice hard. James Mackenzie is a good man, and I will not tolerate that kind of talk in my house. If you cannot be civil, you may leave the table. Eleanor left, but not before shooting Catherine a look of pure venom. Catherine tried not to let it bother her, but she knew that Eleanor would not let this go easily. Over the next few months, James courted Catherine with old-fashioned propriety. He took her on chaperoned rides, brought her wildflowers from the prairie, and sat with her on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Catherine had never been happier. The teaching position was offered to someone else, and she did not regret her decision to stay at the ranch for a moment. But as summer faded into autumn, tensions began to rise. Some of the other ranch hands made comments about James and Catherine, most of them crude and cruel. James ignored them, but Catherine could see the toll it took on him. In town, people whispered when they saw Catherine, and more than once she overheard someone making disparaging remarks about her relationship with that Indian. The breaking point came in October. James and Catherine had ridden out to check on some cattle in the south pasture when they encountered 3 men on horseback. Catherine recognized them as hands from the neighboring Diamond Cross Ranch, and from the way James tensed beside her, she knew he recognized them too. "Well, well," one of the men said, a sneer twisting his face, "if it is not Mackenzie and his Irish whore." Catherine gasped, but before she could respond, James moved his horse between her and the men. "Apologize to the lady, Carter." "Lady?" Carter laughed. "I do not see any lady here. Just a girl too stupid to know her place and a breed who should have stayed on the reservation." "I am only going to ask you one more time," James said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Apologize to Miss O'Sullivan." Carter's hand moved toward the gun at his hip. "Make me." Everything happened very fast after that. James spurred his horse forward, knocking Carter's mount sideways before the man could draw his weapon. The other 2 men moved to help their friend, but James was faster, grabbing Carter and hauling him from his saddle. They hit the ground hard, and James pinned the man with one knee on his chest. "Apologize," James said. "Go to hell," Carter spat. James pressed down harder, and Carter wheezed. "I can do this all day. Apologize to the lady." "I am sorry," Carter finally gasped out. "I am sorry, Miss O'Sullivan." James released him and stood, his chest heaving. "If I ever hear you speak about her again, I will do more than knock you off your horse. Do you understand?" Carter and his friends rode away without another word. James turned to Catherine, who had watched the entire confrontation with her heart in her throat. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I should be asking you that," Catherine said. "James, you could have been hurt." "I am fine," James said. "But Catherine, this is what I was trying to tell you. This is what our life will be like. There will always be people like Carter, people who think we do not deserve to be together." "Then they are fools," Catherine said firmly. "James Mackenzie, I have faced poverty, loss, and humiliation. I have been mocked for my accent, my background, and my circumstances. But none of that prepared me for how it would feel to find someone who sees me as I truly am and loves me anyway. If that means facing down idiots like Carter for the rest of my life, then so be it." James stared at her for a long moment, and then he laughed. "You are the strongest person I have ever met." "I learned from the best," Catherine said, reaching out to take his hand. That night, James asked Samuel for Catherine's hand in marriage. Samuel gave his blessing without hesitation, though he warned them again of the challenges they would face. Eleanor refused to speak to either of them, but Catherine found she did not care. She was too happy, too full of hope for the future. They were married in December of 1883 in a simple ceremony at the ranch. The local preacher performed the service, and most of the ranch hands attended, along with a few friends from town. Eleanor stayed in her room, claiming a headache, but Samuel walked Catherine down the makeshift aisle with tears in his eyes. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he whispered before he gave her away. "You have grown into a remarkable woman." Catherine and James exchanged their vows under a clear winter sky, their breath misting in the cold air. When James slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, Catherine felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be. This was who she was meant to be with. Samuel gifted them a small parcel of land on the edge of the Double H property, along with 20 head of cattle to start their own herd. It was not much, but it was a beginning. James built them a small cabin, working through the winter months with the help of some of the other ranch hands. By spring, it was finished and Catherine moved out of the main house and into her new home. Life was not easy in those early years. James worked long hours, both on their own land and at the Double H to bring in extra money. Catherine learned to run a household on the frontier, a far cry from her life in Boston. She learned to cook over a wood stove, to preserve food for the winter, to mend clothes until they were more patches than original fabric. But she was happy in a way she had never been before. Their first child was born in November of 1884, a healthy boy they named Samuel after Catherine's uncle. James wept when he held his son for the first time, and Catherine understood why. This child would have a father who claimed him, a family who loved him, and a place in the world. All the things James had been denied as a child would be given freely to his son. Eleanor married the following spring, wedding a rancher from Colorado and moving away. Catherine felt relieved by her cousin's departure, though she wished Eleanor well. Samuel grew older and began to turn over more of the ranch operations to his foreman, spending his time doting on his great-nephew instead. In 1886, Catherine gave birth to twin girls, whom they named Rose and Lily. James expanded the cabin to accommodate their growing family, adding 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Their herd had grown to 50 head, and they were beginning to make a real profit from their ranch. It was not a grand life, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and their own labor. One evening in the summer of 1887, Catherine sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the prairie. James sat beside her, their youngest daughter asleep in his arms. Samuel, now almost 3, played in the yard with a wooden horse James had carved for him. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked quietly. Choosing this life, Catherine looked at her husband, at his weathered face and work-roughened hands, at the gentle way he held their daughter. She thought about the girl she had been when she stepped off that stagecoach 4 years ago, so desperate and afraid. She thought about Eleanor's mockery, about her own shame over her accent and her background. "Not for a single moment," she said. "This is exactly where I am meant to be." James smiled and leaned over to kiss her temple. "I love you, Catherine Mackenzie. Every word you speak in that beautiful accent of yours is music to my ears." Catherine laughed and rested her head on his shoulder. In the distance, a coyote called out to the rising moon, and the prairie grass whispered in the evening breeze. It was the sound of home, wild and free and utterly perfect. The years continued to unfold with their share of joys and struggles. In 1888, their ranch suffered through a brutal winter that killed several head of cattle, but they survived by relying on the community they had built around them. The other ranchers in the area, most of whom had initially been skeptical of James and Catherine's marriage, had come to respect the young couple's determination and hard work. Samuel Hutchins passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1889. He left the Double H Ranch to be split between the foreman and Catherine, a decision that shocked everyone, especially the foreman who had expected to inherit the whole thing. But Samuel's will was clear. Catherine was to receive half the value of the ranch, a sum that allowed her and James to expand their own operations significantly. They purchased another 200 acres and built a larger house, one with enough room for their growing family and the children they hoped would come. In 1890, Catherine gave birth to another son, whom they named William after James's father. And in 1892, their final child arrived, a daughter they called Grace. By 1895, the Mackenzie Ranch was one of the most prosperous in the Panhandle. James had proven himself to be a shrewd businessman as well as an excellent rancher, and Catherine's education served her well in managing the ranch's accounts and correspondence. Their children were growing up strong and healthy, running wild across the prairie and learning the rhythms of ranch life. One afternoon in the fall of that year, Catherine was working in her garden when a familiar buggy pulled up to the house. She stood, shading her eyes against the sun, and was surprised to see Alina stepping down. Her cousin was elegantly dressed as always, but there was something different about her, a softness in her expression that had not been there before. "Alina," Catherine said cautiously. "This is unexpected." "I know," Alina said. "May I speak with you, Catherine, please?" Catherine led her cousin into the house and prepared tea while Alina sat at the kitchen table, nervously smoothing her skirts. When Catherine sat down across from her, Alina took a deep breath. "I came to apologize," she said. "I know it is years too late, but I need to say it anyway. I was horrible to you when you first came to Texas. I mocked your accent, your background, everything about you. And I tried to convince myself it was because you did not belong, but the truth is I was jealous." "Jealous?" Catherine asked, genuinely surprised. "Of what?" "Of your courage," Alina said. "You lost everything and had to start over in a strange place, but you never lost yourself. You never pretended to be something you were not, and when you fell in love with James, you did not care what anyone thought, you just went after what you wanted." She looked down at her hands. "I married a man my father approved of, a man who seemed like a good match on paper. But he does not love me, Catherine. I am not sure he even likes me very much. And every time I think about you and James, about how happy you are, I realize I made a terrible mistake." Catherine reached across the table and took Alina's hand. "I am sorry you are unhappy, Alina, truly." "Do you forgive me?" Alina asked, tears slipping down her cheeks. "For how I treated you?" "I forgave you a long time ago," Catherine said gently. "Holding on to anger was only hurting me, not you." Alina stayed for dinner that evening, and for the first time, the two women spoke to each other as friends rather than rivals. James was gracious and welcoming, though Catherine could tell he was watching Alina carefully, protective of his wife. But as the evening wore on, even he relaxed, and by the time Alina left, there was a tentative peace between them all. The turn of the century brought new challenges and new opportunities. The open range was disappearing, fenced in by barbed wire and divided into private property. The railroad had reached Amarillo years before, but now new towns were springing up all along the line. The wild, untamed Texas of Catherine's early years was slowly being civilized, and while part of her mourned the passing of that era, another part of her was excited for what came next. Their children were growing up. Samuel, now 16, was already working the ranch alongside his father and showing a natural talent for the business. The twins, Rose and Lily, were 14 and had just started attending the school in town. William was 10 and obsessed with horses, spending every spare moment in the stable. And Grace, at 8, was the family storyteller, always spinning elaborate tales about the ranch and the people who lived there. One evening in 1901, as Catherine and James sat on the porch of their home watching another spectacular sunset, James turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "You remember the first time we spoke?" he asked. "Really spoke, I mean, the night of that party when Alina embarrassed you." "Of course I remember," Catherine said. "You told me my voice was music to your ears." "I meant it then, and I mean it now," James said. "Every single day with you has been a gift, Catherine. You made me believe that I could have this, a home and a family and a place where I belong. I spent my whole childhood feeling like I did not fit anywhere, and then you came along and made me feel like I fit perfectly, exactly as I am." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. "You did the same for me," she said. "I was so ashamed of who I was, so desperate to be someone else. But you loved me as I was, accent and all. You saw me, James, really saw me. And that changed everything." James pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Behind them, they could hear their children laughing inside the house, the sounds of dishes being washed and a harmonica being played badly. It was the sound of life, messy and imperfect and utterly beautiful. In the years that followed, the Mackenzie Ranch continued to thrive. Samuel eventually took over the day-to-day operations, allowing James and Catherine to step back and enjoy their grandchildren as they arrived. Rose married a lawyer from Amarillo, while Lily became a teacher, taking up the profession Catherine had once considered for herself. William started a horse breeding program that became renowned throughout Texas, and Grace married a newspaper editor and began writing stories about life in the West. James and Catherine grew old together on the land they had built into something remarkable. Their hair turned gray, and their bodies grew stiff with age, but their love remained as strong as it had been that day in the stable when they first admitted their feelings for each other. On a warm evening in 1920, Catherine sat in her rocking chair on the porch, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders despite the heat. James sat beside her, as he had for nearly 40 years of marriage. Their great-grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter echoing across the prairie. "Grandma," one of the children called out, "tell us a story about the old days." Catherine smiled and began to speak, her Irish accent still present after all these years in Texas. She told them about coming to the Panhandle as a young woman, about facing down prejudice and fear, about finding love in the most unexpected place. When she finished, James reached over and took her hand. "Your voice is still music to my ears," he said softly, for only her to hear. "After all these years, I never tire of listening to you speak." Catherine squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses earned from decades of hard work, and smiled. They had built a good life together, she and James. A life filled with love and laughter, with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. A life that had started with mockery and shame, but had transformed into something beautiful. As the sun set over the Texas prairie one more time, Catherine Mackenzie closed her eyes and listened to the sounds around her. The children playing, the cattle lowing in the distance, the rustle of the prairie grass in the evening breeze. And beside her, the steady breathing of the man who had loved her exactly as she was, who had heard music where others heard only difference. It was, she thought, the sweetest sound of all, and it would echo in her heart for whatever time remained to them. Their story had begun with a simple act of kindness, a man defending a woman from cruelty, and it had blossomed into a love that had withstood every challenge life in the West could throw at them. They had built something lasting, something true, and as Catherine drifted off to sleep in her chair, James's hand still in hers, she knew that their love would continue on in the children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward into the new century. The ranch would endure, as would the story of how a poor Irish girl from Boston and a half-Blackfoot cowboy from Montana had found each other in the vastness of the Texas Panhandle and created a love that nothing could diminish. And somewhere, on the wind that swept across the prairie, you could still hear it. The music of Catherine's voice with its lilting Irish cadence and James's steady response. A harmony that would never fade as long as there were people to remember their story and the way they had loved each other completely, without reservation or regret, for all the days of their lives.